Your mum opened the front door at 8:30 in the morning, looked at you and said 4 words. Go on. Play out. And that was it. That was the entire safeguarding policy. No phone, no GPS tracker, no arranged supervision, no risk assessment, just a child, a pair of scuffed trainers, and an entire neighborhood to roam until the streetlights came on. If you grew up in Britain in the 1970s, that was a normal Tuesday. You'd disappear for 8, 9, sometimes 10 hours at a stretch. Your parents had no idea where you were, you had no way of contacting them. And nobody, absolutely nobody, thought this was unusual. Try telling that to a parent in 2026, and they'll look at you like you've just described sending a child to the moon in a shopping trolley. But here's the thing. We did it. Millions of us. And we survived. Most of us, anyway. The things we got up to, the risks we took, the situations we wandered into without a care in the world would make a modern parent's blood run cold. And yet, when you ask anyone who grew up in the 70s about their childhood, they don't talk about it with horror. They talk about it with a warmth that borders on reverence. This is the stuff we did, and this is why nobody would let their children do any of it today. Let's start with the big one. Playing out. Because this wasn't just something children did in the 70s. It was the foundation of the entire childhood experience. You played out. That was your job. Your mum didn't want you in the house. She had things to do. Hoovering, washing, ironing, all without the labor-saving devices that people take for granted now. You were underfoot, you were noisy, and frankly, she needed you gone. So out you went. The instruction was always the same. Be back for tea, or, in some households, be back when the streetlights come on. That was your curfew, not a time on a clock, but an amber sodium light flickering to life at the top of a lamppost. When that light came on, you had about 10 minutes to get home before your full name was bellowed from the front doorstep at a volume that could be heard 3 streets away. Between leaving in the morning and that streetlight flicking on, you were completely free. No check-ins, no phone calls, no adults hovering. You and your mates would roam entire housing estates, explore woods, cross main roads, climb things that shouldn't be climbed, and generally operate as a small, unsupervised gang of feral children. And this was considered healthy. Today, if a parent let their 7-year-old roam the neighborhood unattended for an entire day, there's a reasonable chance someone would call social services. In the 70s, if your kid was still indoors by 9 in the morning, the neighbors would wonder if something was wrong. Now, transport, because how you got around as a child in the 70s was a story of casual danger that would make a modern safety inspector weep. Cars first. Seatbelts existed, technically, but almost nobody used them. The law didn't require rear passengers to wear them until 1991. In the 70s, children rode in the back of cars completely unrestrained. You'd slide around on the vinyl seats every time your dad took a corner. If there were too many kids for the back seat, someone would sit in the boot of the estate car, facing backwards, watching the road disappear behind you. Some families piled children into the front seat, 3 abreast, with the youngest sitting on someone's lap. No car seats, no boosters, just hope and the occasional sharp braking that sent everyone lurching forward. Your dad might let you sit on his lap and steer while he worked the pedals. Down a quiet road, obviously, or what he considered a quiet road, which by modern standards was still a public highway. This was treated as a rite of passage, not a criminal act. And then there were bikes. No helmets. Nobody wore a helmet. The very idea of a cycling helmet would have been met with baffled stares and probably some laughter. You rode your Raleigh chopper or your grifter around the estate at full speed, no helmet, no pads, no high-vis vest, frequently no working brakes, and if you fell off, you got up, checked for blood, and carried on. Scraped knees were not medical emergencies. They were badges of honor. Your mum would dab them with Dettol, which stung worse than the actual injury, stick on an elastoplast, and send you back out. The playgrounds. This is where the real shock factor lives, because 1970s playgrounds were essentially obstacle courses designed by people who had never met a child and didn't particularly like them. Everything was made of metal. The slides were steel, and on a sunny day they'd heat up to temperatures that could genuinely burn exposed skin. You'd launch yourself down a metal slide in shorts and arrive at the bottom with the backs of your legs glowing red. The landing area at the bottom was concrete, not rubber matting, not bark chippings, not the soft, spongy surfaces you see today. Concrete, hard, unforgiving, occasionally cracked concrete. The roundabouts were legendary death traps, a wooden or metal platform that spun on a central pole with curved bars to hold on to. The game was simple. One person pushed, everyone else held on. The faster it went, the harder you gripped. Eventually, someone would lose their hold and fly off at considerable speed, skidding across the tarmac or slamming into whatever was nearby. Children lost teeth on those roundabouts. They got concussions. They came home covered in bruises. And the next day, they went straight back on. The witch's hat was another classic. A cone-shaped frame that swung and spun from a central chain, and you'd cling to the bars as it tilted at alarming angles. The seesaw could trap your fingers under the board when your end hit the ground, or if the kid on the other end jumped off without warning. You'd slam down with enough force to rattle your spine. The swings had no safety harnesses, wooden seats that could crack you on the head if you walked behind them at the wrong moment, and chains that would pinch your fingers if you weren't careful. No parent supervised any of this. You just went to the playground, took your chances, and came home when you'd had enough, or when you needed stitches. The games we played were no safer than the playgrounds we played them in. British Bulldog. If you're under 40, you may never have experienced this, because it was banned from most schools by the mid-80s. The rules were simple. One person stood in the middle of the playground. Everyone else had to run from one side to the other without being caught. Getting caught didn't mean being tagged gently on the shoulder. It meant being grabbed, wrestled to the ground, and physically restrained until you submitted. In practice, it was basically a licensed brawl. Children were tackled, stamped on, sat upon, and occasionally punched, all within the rules of the game. Teachers would eventually notice a pile of 30 children in the middle of the playground, some of them crying, and that would be British Bulldog done for the term. Until someone started it up again the following week. Conkers was another autumn ritual that has since been largely regulated out of existence. You'd pick horse chestnuts off the ground, drill a hole through the middle, thread a piece of string through it, and then take turns smashing your conker against someone else's. The goal was to destroy their conker while keeping yours intact. The cheating was industrial. Kids would soak their conkers in vinegar, bake them in the oven, coat them in clear nail varnish, anything to make them harder. A well-prepared conker was a prized possession. The danger came from the swinging. A conker on a string aimed poorly could hit you on the knuckles with surprising force, and if the string snapped mid-swing, the conker would fly off and hit whoever was standing nearby. Clackers were a brief but brilliant craze, 2 heavy acrylic balls on strings attached to a central handle. You'd swing them up and down, trying to get them to clack together above and below your hand in a continuous rhythm. When it worked, it was mesmerizing. When it went wrong, which was often, you'd smash yourself on the wrist, the elbow, or the face with a solid plastic ball travelling at speed. They were eventually taken off the market when reports emerged of the balls shattering on impact and sending shards of acrylic into the surrounding area. Bonfire night. The 5th of November. This was the single most dangerous night of the entire year for a British child, and it was absolutely magnificent. For weeks beforehand, children would roam the neighbourhood collecting anything that would burn: old furniture, pallets, cardboard boxes, timber from skips, anything. You'd drag it all to a patch of waste ground and build a bonfire that, in retrospect, was dangerously close to fences, garages, and occasionally actual houses. Nobody supervised the construction, nobody checked the site, nobody applied for planning permission. You just built the biggest fire you could and stood back. Then there was Penny for the Guy. Children would make a stuffed figure out of old clothes and newspaper, prop it up in a pushchair or on a chair outside the local shop, and ask passers-by for money. "Penny for the guy, mister." The money was supposed to go towards fireworks, and often it did. Because here's the part that would genuinely horrify a modern parent. Children could buy fireworks. You'd walk into a shop, a newsagent, a post office, sometimes even a corner shop, and buy bangers, rockets, Catherine wheels, and Roman candles with your pocket money. No age check, no questions. Just hand over the coins and walk out with a bag of explosives. The things children did with those fireworks would make a health and safety officer need medical attention. Bangers were thrown, posted through letterboxes, set off in school corridors, and lobbed at each other as weapons. Jumping jacks were specifically designed to bounce along the ground in unpredictable directions, and children would throw them into groups of other children just to watch them scatter. Sparklers were waved around without gloves, the wire staying hot long after the sparkle had gone. And on the night itself, you'd stand far too close to a bonfire the size of a small house, watching fireworks being set off by someone's dad who'd had a few drinks and was aiming the rocket launcher with the precision of a man who couldn't see straight. It was chaos. It was glorious. And the fact that any of us still have our fingers is frankly a miracle. School in the 70s was a different world, and the discipline would be unrecognizable to any child in a modern classroom. Corporal punishment was legal in British state schools until 1987. Throughout the 70s, teachers could and did hit children. The cane was the most infamous weapon, a thin, flexible rod applied to the palm of the hand, or in some schools the backside. The slipper was another popular choice, a Jim Plimsoll brought down hard on whichever part of the child was most convenient. Some teachers threw board rubbers at children who weren't paying attention. Chalk was launched across classrooms. One poorly aimed answer, and you might find a wooden-backed blackboard duster sailing towards your head. The culture around it was stark. You were sent to the headmaster's office, you waited outside the door, you heard the muffled sounds of whoever was in there before you, and then you went in. Some headmasters had a selection of canes to choose from. You'd hold out your hand and you'd take your punishment. Then you'd go back to class with stinging palms and watering eyes, and nobody would say a word about it. Teachers also had a range of lesser punishments that would still be considered completely unacceptable today. Standing in the corner with your face to the wall, being made to stand on your chair in front of the entire class, having your ear pulled, being lifted by your sideburns, having a piece of chalk thrown at you for talking. These things happened daily, in ordinary schools, to ordinary children, and they were considered part of the educational experience. The approach to food and health in the 70s was, by modern standards, gloriously relaxed. Children drank from the garden hose in summer. You'd stick your mouth directly over the end of the hose, turn the tap on, and drink the warm, slightly metallic, probably slightly contaminated water without a second thought. Nobody mentioned bacteria, nobody mentioned lead pipes. You were thirsty, there was a hose, problem solved, you ate things off the ground. The 5-second rule wasn't a joke, it was policy. A sweet that landed on the pavement was brushed off and eaten. An apple from someone else's garden was scrumped without washing. You shared drinks, shared food, and shared whatever germs were going around without the slightest concern. Everyone's parents smoked. In the house, in the car with the windows up, in the living room while you sat 2 feet away watching television. The car journeys were the worst. A closed car, 2 adults smoking, and 3 children in the back seat breathing it all in. Nobody opened a window. Nobody considered the health implications. It was just what happened. Medicine was administered with a casualness that would alarm any modern GP. A dose of Calpol for almost anything. Calamine lotion for every rash, regardless of cause. TCP for cuts. A hot toddy for a cold, which in some households included a splash of whiskey for children under 10. If you bumped your head, you were told to sit down for a minute. If you still felt dizzy after 5 minutes, you might see a doctor. The threshold for medical attention was significantly higher than it is today. Looking at all of this written down, it sounds reckless, it sounds neglectful. It sounds like an entire generation of parents collectively decided that child safety wasn't really their department. But that's not what it was. Not really. What it was a different understanding of childhood. The 70s generation of parents, many of whom had grown up during or just after the war, had a fundamentally different relationship with risk. They believed that children needed to fall over in order to learn how to get up. They believed that a scraped knee was a lesson, not a crisis. They believed that boredom was something you solved yourself, not something an adult solved for you. And there's something in that. Because the children who grew up in the 70s, the ones who played on those concrete playgrounds and rode those helmeted bicycles and bought fireworks from the corner shop, they learned things that are harder to learn in a safer world. They learned to assess danger for themselves. They learned that actions have consequences, sometimes painful ones. They learned to negotiate, to cooperate, to fight their own battles, to dust themselves off and carry on. None of which is to say the 70s were better. Children got hurt, some got hurt badly. The removal of lead from petrol, the introduction of seatbelt laws, the banning of corporal punishment in schools, the safety standards in playgrounds, all of these changes saved lives and prevented suffering. Nobody sensible would argue for going backwards. But there's a reason that people who grew up in that era talk about it the way they do. With a smile, with a shake of the head, with that particular tone that says, "You wouldn't believe what we used to get up to." Because they remember the freedom, the wind in your face as you hammered down a hill on a bike with no brakes, the heat of the bonfire on November the 5th, standing so close your cheeks burned, the sound of your mum's voice carrying across 3 streets, calling you home for tea, the feeling of being completely, utterly, gloriously unsupervised, with nothing but your mates, your imagination, and the slowly darkening sky. Today's children live in a safer world, a kinder world, a world with seatbelts and helmets and soft play centres and parents who know exactly where they are at every moment of every day. And that's a good thing, genuinely, but if you grew up in Britain in the 1970s, you know something that's hard to explain to anyone who didn't. You know what it felt like to be truly free, to make your own decisions, take your own risks, and face your own consequences, all before the age of 10. The streetlights are coming on. Time to go home.